Okay, great. So the group norms that you all articulated, I just want to give anybody a chance if they want to add anything. You can unmute. You could put it in chat, and Ashley will help me know what's in chat because I can't see chat. My impression this week is that everybody is treating each other with respect and honoring different learning styles. But as time goes on, if these feel like they are not being honored, we can talk about it. I think it's really important that you helped generate these group norms because it's, as you know, if you've attended any of the alumni panels, it's how you all treat one another and how you all help one another that is one of the really distinguishing factors of Shine. You will also experience this, hopefully, with your mentors, that they will treat you with this kind of respect as well, that hopefully they will honor different learning styles. So this is all really important part of what we're doing here in Shine. Okay. Yeah, so let's see, I gotta escape. Now I wanna go back to, Google. Hang on, you guys. This is not as easy as, here we are. Screen share. Share. All right, here we go. I'm gonna play this video. I don't know how it's gonna look or sound, so if it doesn't sound good, you guys all start waving at me or something, okay? Can you hear it? No?
We can't hear it.
Katie, I think you have to reshare your screen, but when you're sharing your screen, you click share audio as well.
Okay, let me give it a try. Got it. I don't have the Zoom. Okay, everybody, go to Google right now and watch this video. Go to Google, watch the video. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'll see you back here in 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Let us march on till victory is won.
I'll go watch the video too.
Okay. Probably everybody's done. So it's a nice way of sort of bookending where we started this week when we talked about the systemic racism that is at work in scientific collaborations, just as it is in society. Today is Juneteenth, and there's a lot of information out there about Juneteenth, that it's the day, it's 155 years ago, 1865, the day that the Texas slaves learned that slaves had been freed, and it took them 2 years for the Texas slaves to learn it after the Civil War had ended. Quite an outrage, but also underscoring the importance of communication, and fighting the systems that prevent that kind of communication that can help give people opportunities and liberate them literally from slavery. All right, now, what does this have to do with science? I mean, Dr. Nord in the beginning talked about what this had to do with science. Today, I want to ask, like, what does this video have to do with us? A lot of you have been coming to my office hours or slacking me, and a really persistent question right now this first week is, how do I choose between STEM and the humanities? And I think that you guys know my philosophy. It's like, don't choose. Keep a foot in both, and they're not mutually exclusive. Even if you have to choose a major, if you are going to end up being maybe a legislator and you're interested in law, having an engineering undergraduate degree teaches you analytical thinking. As you know, for me, I've got a STEM and humanities background. But I just wanted to keep this present as a conversation about STEM versus humanities. And I also want to think about what you just watched, because there was a lot of STEM in what you watched. Paula, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're a games major, which means that you may or may not be taking animation classes. I don't know. Will you be taking animation as a games major?
I believe so, but not yet.
Yes. Oops. There's my phone. Right. So, but you can recognize, is there a lot of animation going on there?
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, how long do you think it took somebody to code all of that and do all that? Like an hour?
Oh, no.
100 hours?
Probably more than 100, but yeah.
Probably 1,000 could be. So, so there's a lot of computer science and the stuff that we consider the humanities. There's a lot of other aspects of computer science too. Thank you, Paula, for letting me put you on the spot. So I would love for you to unmute, and I would love to hear some theories about what's the role of the daily videos in Google. Why do they do that? I mean, they spend a lot of money on the humanities every day, changing their video with music, with art, with all of this stuff. They're reflecting on what's happening in society. Why do they do that?
Well,
Go
okay.
ahead.
Okay. I think for the most part, since Google is like really widely used by most people, it like lets Google reach out to everyone and kind of give awareness to sometimes things that may be like less known to the majority of people. And yeah. Just
And
providing awareness, I think, in general.
okay, so they're doing a public service of providing awareness.
Yeah, part of it.
Okay, thank you, Nico. Who else was talking?
So yeah, it was really similar to what Nico was saying. I just want to say, like, since like a lot of people use Google on like a daily basis, right? Like when you start your work in the morning, and so like there's a doodle Google, and so like it's also really like accessible for people than actually going on the news and like reading what's happening. So like within like 2 minutes, you can just get a general like, okay, today's Juneteenth, or today is like Pancake Day or something, whatever it is. And so like, I feel like that's like their way of giving back in a way. Like it gives you like news, but like in a very little amount of time. And like it kind of also makes your day really like, it makes your day a different way. Like you get a different perspective to see it. It's not like, oh, today's just a normal day. right? Sometimes you can be like, oh wait, well this is happening today, and it's interesting. It doesn't happen every day. So that's what I
Good.
think.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to say anything? Thank you both, Vrinda and Nico.
Something that I think that another thing is that since it's different every year, you look forward to, or you ask what are they going to do this year, or you check on what else they added. Like I remember one year for Halloween, they just had like a small mini game. That was really fun, and I was looking forward to next year. Like, oh, what are they going to do this year? Yeah.
Okay, all right. So of course you all are right. Google is so huge. It's got to do a lot just to be a good citizen, right? But Alan also just hit it on the head that it keeps you coming back, right? How many of you look at the Google video many days? Okay, right. So how is it that Google or Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram, all of these things, how do they keep us coming back? That is a huge part of computer science, and we're going to learn a little bit more than that. Let me ask you this. You may or may not do Snapchat. It's not as popular as it was a couple of years ago. I would love to have you unmute, and I would love to have you tell me how Snapchat keeps you keeps you hooked.
I think the main reason it keeps you hooked is because all your friends are on the platform. And with this kind of story format, like you see, even if your friends aren't directly messaging you, you still see what they're up to. And that's kind of addictive because humans are like by nature really social. So like this sort of fear of missing out on what your friends are doing, I guess, keeps you hooked on the platform so you can't leave.
FOMO keeps you hooked. Okay, thank you, Jacob. Go ahead.
I think the Snapchat news is just a very short snippet of something that is good and you should know about, but it's very short, it's pretty colorful and bubbly, and sometimes there's music in the background, and so it's just happens right away. You get the information instantly and it's pleasing to look at. So that's like a way that they hook you, where it's different than a black and white newspaper article that's long and takes time to sit down and read it.
All right. So go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
Both of you.
I'll go after. It's okay.
Okay. I think something that keeps people coming back to Snapchat is the streaks that they have, which is like you send like something to someone else and then they send something back and then you get like a streak, right? So keeping that up is like important to people because it's like this easy task that you can do to get some sort of like recognition, and because you want to like keep it up, it like keeps the users going back.
I was gonna say something like what Rachel said. In like I study a lot of game theory, so and I play a lot of poker. So if the pot is big enough to where you're gonna lose a lot of utility by not doing something, you will do it. So if you're losing, let's say 300 days worth of streak just by not committing, then you will commit and you will fall for that.
Okay. All right. So a couple of things. First of all, you see how there is humanities involved here, right? That's colorful. There's stories, right? Narrative, telling stories. So that's why I'm in engineering, because I can tell stories. And now it keeps you in touch with your friends, instant gratification. It plays on that FOMO. And there's a huge commitment that you could lose, but there's did I already say instant gratification? You get your streak. Okay, how would you predict who's going to be a heavy user if you were studying users? What would you look at? What would you look for? If you could predict who was a heavy user of Snapchat, what types of things would you look for?
I mean,
Oh, sorry.
no, I already spoke, so yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say age is a pretty big predictor. Like they've got a pretty specific demographic.
Good, right? Yeah.
I'd also probably like check to see how much social media presence they have before using Snapchat, like on other platforms, maybe like Facebook or like whatever other stuff they use based on like how many other users that they connect.
So you look at their digital footprint if you
Yeah.
could. Okay, good. Anybody
Kind of
else?
like what Jesse said, how active they are on other platforms and what types of other platforms they use. Like if they use social media that's similar to Snapchat, they'll probably be a heavy Snapchat user too.
Okay, all right.
I would look for like people's attention spans, because usually when they have short attention spans, it's much better for like kind of this like kind of short like social media stuff, because a lot of snaps are like really short, so that's what makes it really addictive.
So that's interesting. How would you test people's attention spans?
Like you can have like an experiment where they're like isolated in a room, and then like you ask them to like maybe like not touch something, but then like you can measure how long it takes them for them to actually touch something, because they're like really bored and whatnot, I guess.
Okay, so William just talked about an experimental model, right? And we all hear about this, that sometimes when you're in college, the psych department will give you 10 or 25 bucks for going into a room and, you know, getting your attention span tested or something like that. So that's experimental. And we also want to know that there's a lot of computational modeling out there. As you know, many of you are going to start MATLAB next week, which is a way of mathematically modeling. So I want to think about these two ways that are available to engineers to help determine the impact of the research, or to help them understand the research they're doing. Now, this is a little bit of a teaser. We're not going to actually look at the answers right now, but on Tuesday, the 30th of June, we have a guest speaker, Professor Wren, who did work at Snapchat, and he will talk about the research he does or he did, I don't know if he's still doing it, for Snapchat, on how they can predict who's going to be a heavy user and how they can manipulate that to keep you a heavy user. All right, and he uses mathematical models, but he will talk about using the demographic models, the way Asa mentioned, that a certain age group, which is true, certainly your age group, or even maybe a little older, used Snapchat, or maybe you used Snapchat more when you were a little younger. That demographics is a very, the way they first started trying to understand heavy users in Snapchat or other apps. And then they evolved, they found that there was a gap in understanding heavy users by using demographics. So then computer scientists start making computational models to do this. And it involves a little bit of the digital footprint that Jesse and others were talking about. So we are not going to have these answers now. I'm giving you FOMO now, because you don't have to come on Tuesday to hear Professor Wren, but you're going to be missing out if you don't come. And you will find out, how do these platforms keep you hooked? That might give you a little bit of power over them, if you want any power over them. Okay, what does all this have to do with anything? We're going to come back to what this has to do with things, but really what I'm going to be focusing on today is how we use the sort of analytical skills that they are trying to teach you in high school, and how can we map those, the things that you already are familiar with, onto what we're doing in Shine, what PhD students do. Okay, we are now going to have a test. All right, we didn't warn you about this test, and I hope that you don't drop out of Shine because you're so scared about this test. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley now to run the test.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Spoilers. Has anybody not played Kahoot before? I would assume the majority of you all have, but if not, I'll do a quick explanation. I'll start sharing my screen. So this is Kahoot. the way you join it is either you get on your phone or you can split screen on your laptop that you're currently on and go to kahoot.it. It's right here. And then type in this pin, and it's essentially a quiz, but not really. Actually, I'll just let you guys see it, like when it happens. So join everybody. Please use appropriate names. Thank you. Oh, and you should use your real name because we have prizes at the end. Okay. Kendall's playing. Okay. Should I leave the music? I'll leave the music a little bit. Waiting on like 2 more people, I think. Yeah, Kahoot Trap Remix is the best. Okay, is everybody on? If not, type in the chat. Like quickly, just say no. Okay, so everybody's on. I can start.
Go for it.
Okay. The first question might be hard, but
I'm not playing because this is too hard for me. Oh, yay.
my head.
You guys are so smart. A lot of you like hiking. Maybe someday we'll get to hike together. Maybe Jasper can do the music for our future Kahoot games.
That one was good.
All right. Certainly don't need 60 seconds for these, do you?
Yeah.
Mm.
Ethan knows everybody. That was good. Everybody does ASAP.
We have some talent in our cohort.
Wait, you saw a Gutenberg Bible? Those are extremely rare.
That's what the Library of Congress is for, very rare things.
Big deal. We're down to the last few, everybody.
All right.
Ooh.
The girls are gaining on the guys. All right, is this the last one?
Yep, it's the last one.
All right, last chance.
Okay, let's see the winners.
Wow, third place.
Yeah, Ethan.
Ethan.
Okay.
All right, Anthony. All right, runners up, William and Monacy. All right, hopefully that got us to get to know each other a little bit more. All right. Yeah. Did we get everybody in the Kahoot?
No, half of them are on Kahoot and half of them are next Friday on another game.
Okay. All right, you guys. More tests. More tests are coming. All right. So you all survived that. All right, great. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Thank you. The Center Mentor spent a lot of time putting this together for you guys. So, okay. So here are the practices, or you might call them abilities, that high school wants you to know. And who's high school? What do I mean? Next generation science standards. Do you guys hear that term? Okay, it'll be a mystery to me whether or not you know that term. But these are the sort of 8 skills that they hope that students through all grades will develop. And then there's particular goals that they have at the high school level for that when you finish high school, you should be able to, on a quite sophisticated level, ask questions, define problems, develop and use models. You can read all of these. I also put them on our shared Google Drive in case you want to look at them. And you can see what we've been doing this morning is trying to work our way through this a little bit. We asked questions about how Snapchat might keep you hooked. William suggested an experimental model where we could put students of a, and Asa would say of a particular age into a room and study their attention span. But there might also be a mathematical model that somebody trained in computer science could use. We are also working on reading the publications of our PIs, and I'm telling you to skip the methods section that tells you how they planned and carried out their investigations. So certainly you have to do this in your high school courses, but in Shine, you can leave this to the experts. And just if you can understand a fifth, a tenth of what they're doing, then you are doing great. You will be doing a lot of analysis and interpretation of data. Because you can't go into the lab, you're probably going to get the data that's already been collected. You may use MATLAB, you may use Excel, you may use Python as a way of interpreting this data. Those of you who are going to be learning MATLAB will be using Mathematical, and all of you are basically using computational thinking. How can you break down all of these questions into discrete packages and look for patterns? You are already looking for explanations. You're looking at how the PIs use arguments from evidence. We looked at this with Dr. Yancey as well. And communicating information is something that the publications, the poster sessions, all of this is really something that we're going to be looking at even more today, and that is going to be where you are going to be participating, because you will be learning how to communicate the social benefits of the research that you do. Okay, so if you came to my info session way back in March, you may have seen this slide, but I realized that a lot of you didn't come. So you may be wondering why it's called the Viterbi School of Engineering. And it's because of Dr. Andrew Viterbi, who still hangs out around every once in a while. He's the one that created the algorithm that carries our cell phone messages and figures out how to make them work. It's all I can basically understand. But so it's good for you to know why we're named the way we are. And you can just imagine how way back in 1967, when satellites were still pretty new, the kinds of cloud, the kinds of questions, the kind of creativity that he had to use in order to basically change all of our lives. You know, we can't play Kahoot easily without our cell phones. Okay, so back to this. So pretty easy to think back about how Dr. Yancey, he's the physician who published his editorial, his opinion piece in the Journal of the American Medical Association. To think it back, you noticed how many questions he asked, and so that's always a good strategy. If you're reading anything and they ask a question, look for it. And we already talked this week about how he used evidence to support his opinion. And what we're going to look at in a little bit more depth today is the publications that you're starting to read. How do they define problems? So you already know what I recommend about using IMRAD to find what the problems are, but not focus on the methods and stuff like that. Now, I've been looking over the readings that your mentors have been giving you. I haven't looked at every single one, and they are hard, okay? No two ways about it. These readings are hard. And people have slacked me and said, how much am I supposed to understand? And if this week you can understand 2%, 5%, then you are doing an excellent job. Do not think that you need to understand this, that you need to read it all at this point. And so what we're going to do as a breakout activity today is we've put you into different groups. So I'm not, and I've got the first page or first pages of a couple of these readings. I haven't put you into a group where it's not sub-cohorts, where if you're in the civil, aerospace, and mechanical engineering subgroup, you get to be together and figure out what you can already know. What we're going to do in this breakout activity is, even if you don't understand anything about what you're looking at, how can you find at least what the research gap is, at least what's important about it, stuff like that, okay? So part of what we're trying to do, and what these 8 skills that are part of the next generation science standards, is to move up this chain. It sounds a little pejorative if you want to call these low order skills, but these are like trying to remember everybody's name that we just did. But what we're really focusing on here in Shine is taking the knowledge that you've already learned in high school and your STEM courses, and using them, analyzing, evaluating, and to a certain degree, creating. You will be creating your poster at the end. You will be creating your communication about what you've done this summer. So this is sort of the schematic that drives what we're trying to do here. Now, we've already talked about the hierarchies, and I looked over the breakout activities that you did on Wednesday about what's implicit, explicit, the questions you want to know that you would like to have answered. So just as a recap of the hierarchies and why you might not see your PIs as much. They're off trying to write proposals or share their results. It's really the postdocs and PhD students that do the day-to-day research, and you are getting to observe that along with others. But that does not mean that they only do the upper level stuff, that even here at this level, you guys are going to be analyzing, evaluating. Okay, that's part of what we're doing when you are starting to look at the literature. Okay, and even though you may not be able to run your own project here in 7 weeks in Shine, something that you think up that you want to find the answer, this is how these skills, these areas map onto what we're doing in Shine. And this is all part of, here's another schema. I'm giving you a lot of schemas here. And remember what Professor Alon says. A schema is, it's just a way of trying to organize and communicate information, but it really is not the way everything really goes. But you're beginning to learn how to find the research question. You're beginning to look at the literature. Because all research builds on the foundation that has come before. You really cannot do research without doing a literature review, understanding what other people have done, and then finding the gaps. Okay, so this is what we're going to practice today, finding the gaps. This is partially what you're learning, the different methods used by your PhD students, but this is what you want to skip over in the readings. You do want to go right to the results and the discussion, more the discussion than the results. But this is what we're also trying to do here, is trying to understand at least how the PhD mentors and the PIs are putting all of this together. And this is where we spend a fair amount of time in Shine, is so that you can leave here being able to talk about the social benefits, the gap in research, and the intervention that your PI or your PhD student mentor is making. All right, so we spent a lot of time working on communication and understanding the value of it and participating in it. There's another way of looking at all of these things too, and when you're put on a research group, you get to observe firsthand the habits of mind and the practices that engineers participate in. Part of what you are using is the STEM basics, the engineering basics, the fluid dynamics or the MATLAB, but you get to observe all of these other things. And what we do in Shine is built upon literature, what's built upon what our professional organizations do. So we don't just totally make this up. We sort of make it up, but we don't totally make it up. Okay. What I would like you to do is you're going to be put into breakout rooms in a minute. There is an activity in our shared folder. I've created a tiny URL that'll make it easier for you to do. So I think that you're going to have to do a split screen and open it up. I'm going to see, and what this is, we'll do the first one together. What this PDF is just the first page or maybe 2 pages of one of the scholarly articles that has been chosen for you, for the cohort to read, okay? As I said, I'm not putting you into your specialty, and hopefully your breakout rooms, you're all coming from a different field of engineering, because what I want you to do is just analyze, ask questions, and figure out together how to navigate some of these things. Now, I picked one that I thought was pretty hard, and some of them are so hard that I really want to say, do not get sidetracked by thinking that you need to understand this stuff. If in week 1 you can even learn how to break down these into IMRAD, you're doing good. I promise you that week by week, you will understand these more. You may never come back to this particular reading. Okay, I picked this one because it was hard. I picked it too, so that you know always to look at the people, look where they are from. Okay, Professor Ravichandran is in the Department of Material Science. Mithili is one of the PhD student mentors. Tom Orvis used to be one. I'm pretty sure he finished with his PhD. So these are all clues. The final author is usually the principal investigator. The lead author, the first few authors, are usually the junior people. Right? Okay. We know to read the abstract first. Look at IMRAD. I only gave the first page of this in the PDF. Okay. Let's take a look at this. And even if you hate chemistry and you can't understand this, what is it that these authors are trying to show you is important? Can we work on identifying here and what you see on the screen? What's important? Is there a gap? You're going to have to unmute. It's really hard. Even if you can't understand the chemistry, look for the words that point out that there's a gap, and that what Professor Ravichandran and his research team, where are they making an intervention?
It looks like on the abstract it says like the challenges is trying to do this electron spectroscopy on like complex oxide films. So I think they're trying to like maybe do something with that, or like try to find like a new method to do that.
Okay. Let me point. Okay, so they're very methods heavy here, right? Material science, it makes sense, right? They're trying to look at the materials that can be used to test certain things, right? So agar, we probably know if you've ever had to do a Petri dish, it's agar in there. The spectra, what you could measure in spectrophotometry, even if you don't know what spectrophotometry is, you can tell just by breaking down those words. To perform some sort of analysis with some sort of resolution. Okay? Good. So even if you don't understand this, you know that they are trying to solve something. The authors address the challenges in achieving something. Okay? Let's go further down. What are some words, common English words, that give you a clue about what they're trying to do?
Like transistors and random access memory shows like it's about computer parts and stuff.
Okay,
And then
where are you, Nikitas? Where are
it's
you?
about like halfway through the first paragraph.
So steer me. Can you see my cursor?
Wait, let me find it myself. So film transistors, if you go where the 5 6 is above your cursor. Yeah, and then and then also resistive random access memory. So it shows like they're trying to find out about new materials that might help with like denser transistor counts in electronics and to create better RAM and better CPUs and GPUs.
Okay, so it sounds like you understand this already way better than I do. But motivated interest, and then what was the second sentence that I could highlight for people?
Oh, just that sentence. Like the continuation of that sentence would be
common method, especially suited, however. All right, look for those howevers. They're notoriously complex. So even if you don't understand what PLD is, you know that there's something that's really hard. It's a great impediment. Okay, so you know that this research is answering a problem. Okay, my goal is to get you breaking out and talking to each other, puzzling your way through this just a little bit. I'm going to ask Ashley to put us into breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to do this for just 10 minutes. You don't have to get through the whole thing. There's multiple pages here. We go on. There's the first 2 pages from Professor Nicolaidis's. So see what you can do with those first 2 pages. If you don't like that, you can skip. You can go to the first page of a reading from Professor Basarik Gerber in civil engineering. This one's a little easier to understand. You might want to skip to this one. And then I've got the first 2 pages of a publication by Professor Chung. Again, we're just going to spend 10 minutes doing this. You may or may not be paired with a center mentor or with me. Just ask each other questions, spend 10 minutes trying to figure this out. Then we'll come back as a group, then we'll take a break, and Dr. Cho will be here to talk to you about his journey. Okay?
Specifically, I'm affiliated with the Department of Biomedical Engineering. So I'm sure some of you might be thinking right now, okay, why is a lab technician our first Shine speaker for the program? Well, as Katie said, I'm fairly familiar with Shine because I actually did my PhD here, so in Dr. Megan McCain's lab. And although I myself was unable to have a Shine mentor, a lot of my colleagues in the lab did have Shine students. And because of that, the past 3 years, I was able to interact with a lot of the students. Just in general, talk a lot to Katie just to see like what the program is about. So I would say I'm familiar with Shine. So I think this would be a good presentation. But just it's amazing just to see just all of you just starting so early in research, because I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. When I was a high school student, I didn't know anything about research. If anything, I was busy studying for my classes, studying for SATs, and meanwhile juggling a couple extracurricular activities. But you all are so fortunate to be part of this program, because at least as of now, although you're unable to physically go into the lab, you're able to learn a lot of the techniques that we usually use in the research field. So, that's amazing, and I hope you get a lot out of this program. And with that said, the topic of the presentation today is a self-introduction for about half of it, and then how you can best prepare for research. Without further ado, let's get started. So in the beginning, a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in the cloudy city of San Francisco, up here in the Bay Area. And for those of you who have visited the city before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's pretty much cloudy all year long. It's rainy about half of the year, and there's an average temperature of about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And for those of you who like the cold, that's perfect. It was all right for me, and just like y'all's, I was a high school student at one point. Specifically, I graduated 10 years ago. That is me right there. So as many of you can probably relate to, during this time, I was busy applying for a lot of colleges. I got accepted into a lot of colleges, but surprisingly, it wasn't too difficult to figure out what school I wanted to go to. So three months of summer break, and I migrated to the sunny city of Los Angeles, trek to SoCal, to the best university in the world, UCLA. So that's me right there, class of 2014. Yeah, go Bruins. But I do want to address this though, that I do want to mention that because I transitioned from UCLA to USC, I got a lot of flack from both ends. So I remember when I got into USC, a lot of my friends were like, "Oh, like why are you going to USC? You're such a traitor." And then on the other end, when I got into USC, they're like, "Oh, you're from UCLA? Oh, you're one of those Bruins?" And yeah, it's all fun and games until you hear for years and people asking which school do you like better. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question. We'll move on. Okay, so what you're looking at right here is a condensed timeline of my undergraduate life at UCLA. I actually came into the school as a chemical engineering major. I graduated as a chemical engineering major, so I stuck with the same major for 4 years. So for those of you who have any questions about chemical engineering or you have some interest in it, please let me know at the end of the presentation. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. But yeah, so the timeline here, by the way, can you see my cursor? Hopefully you guys can see a cursor. Okay, so I started freshman year, September 2010, graduated June 2014. So essentially my freshman year, I was focused on taking classes. And that's because I wanted to keep getting good grades. And a lot of the stuff I was learning in college was tougher than in high school, so I needed more time to study. And not only that, not only for classes, I was also trying to balance my academic life with my social life. So, and for a lot of you who are gonna be going to college, you're gonna be facing this dilemma of how to balance both. But it's incredibly important that you work hard in your classes, but also know to have fun. And that balance is incredibly important, and that's what I was trying to figure out my first year. Jumping to my senior year, I was focused on submitting applications for grad school. And it's like applying for college all over again, except they require a lot more supplemental essays. So that wasn't as fun. So you're thinking, Nathan, what did you do in the middle of your college? Well, I was presented with 2 research opportunities that I jumped on. The first was I joined Dr. Yi Tang's lab at UCLA. And he's part of the chemical and biomolecular engineering department. And I started about halfway into my sophomore year, so January of 2012, and I stayed for about a year and a half. During my sophomore and junior year summers, I was fortunate enough to go back home to the Bay Area and work at the Joint Bioenergy Institute at Berkeley. So they're affiliated with UC Berkeley. And I was part of the Pathway and Metabolic Engineering group. And yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit about my experience there. So if I have to explain my research experience, for a lack of a better term, I would say that my undergrad research experience was interesting. It will be easier to split it between expectation and reality, and you'll see why I did this. So we'll start off with the Ting Lab at UCLA. So my project essentially involved designing nanocapsules, which are essentially like a thin polymer membrane, and it's supposed to encapsulate some sort of drug. And specifically, the drug that we were interested in was a liver protein that when this is delivered to a cell, the cell would transform into a pancreatic beta cell. And for those of you who don't know, pancreatic beta cells are the cells that are responsible for secreting insulin. And patients with type 1 diabetes, they normally do not produce insulin. So therefore, if we can administer this drug to the patients, our goal would be to combat type 1 diabetes. So I remember I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be so awesome. Like I'm going to be under a microscope designing this very thin capsule. I'm going to hand pick and purify the protein of interest. And then I'm going to be testing it on the cells. And, first time everything's going to go perfectly because, that's how it always works. And then in about a year or so, I'm going to see this administered to a patient and boom, a once diabetic patient will no longer be diabetic. That would have been awesome, but reality says otherwise. So as an undergrad, especially in our lab, I worked in what we call a wet lab. So essentially we're working with cells and chemicals. So, and pretty much all wet labs, you use plastic tips. And these small plastic tips are basically, you're supposed to transport small volumes of liquid from one location to another. And they come in these little nice boxes. So of course, there's going to be a point where the box is going to be empty and somebody has to refill them. So who's a better candidate to refill tip boxes than an undergraduate student? So yeah, so I did that. I filled these tips up, a lot of boxes because they go through a lot like every day. And then I sterilized these so that they can use them. The second thing I did was I made and ran gels. So essentially, and this specific gel that you're looking at, it's supposed to measure protein size. So what it is that you see there's an electrode that's connected. So when you load up a solution, the electric current drives the liquid down, and the protein that was in the liquid, it would form a dark band. And the dark band will correspond to a specific size of the protein. And this is incredibly important to do because when we're extracting the liver protein, there's a lot of impurities that come with it. And of course, we go through purification processes, but this is a kind of a quality check to make sure that you get a band that corresponds to the size of your actual liver protein before you administer these to the cells and like test it out. So I thought that part was cool. So that was the Ting Lab. Let's look at the Joint Bioenergy Institute research. So the project involved essentially combining different gene constructs, and then we're putting these into E. coli cells. And what we're doing is that we're forcing the E. coli metabolic pathway to produce biofuel molecules. And as we know, biofuels are important as a source of renewable and alternative energy. So this is a very important field. So that was the project I was given. And I remember I was thinking, oh, this is going to be awesome. It's kind of like playing Legos where I stack different pieces together. But instead of Lego pieces, they're going to be genes. I'm going to be piecing them together. I'm going to put them in cells. I'm going to see all these biofuels made. And the company is going to get super rich off of me. Like that's what I was thinking. And one important thing to mention is that these biofuels, when a physical indicator that the biofuel was made is that it actually has this artificial citrusy smell. So kind of like a car freshener, like those like orange ones. That's actually how it smells, like out of the E. coli bottle. So that's how you know if you can smell something orangey, then you know you formed the right thing. But that's far from reality in terms of what I actually did. So there are two things I did. I shocked cells, quote unquote. So what that basically means is I put a solution of E. coli cells along with this combined gene that I made. And then you would, when you shock the cells, you're essentially weakening the cell membrane so that this constructed gene can go into the cell and thus alter the metabolic pathway. But of course, just with anything in science, there's always bound to be mishaps. And as you all know from general biology, for DNA is double-stranded and there's a complementary pair that it binds to. But this isn't always very specific. So there could be a similar sequence all throughout the gene. So you want to make sure that they're attached in the correct manner. And the way you would do that is you'd run a DNA gel so that you can see the correct size that this construct would correspond to. Then you know for sure that you have the correct one. Then you can put them in the cells, and then you are able to make the biofuel. So overall, my research experience was a good exposure to research. That's the best way I could say it. Although there were a lot of grunt work, such as refilling the tips, honestly, I'm very thankful for this experience because I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for these research experiences. So that's something to keep in mind. So, all right, I finished all my research and I hit the end of my junior year, about to enter senior year. And a lot of people in college at this point are starting to think, what am I gonna do for the rest of my life? Like, I need a job after college, right? So I remember I was brainstorming, and there were three potential career paths that I could think of. The first was to go work for a biotechnology industry, such as Amgen or Johnson & Johnson. So I would be working for a company and I'd be like, oh yes, that's the big bucks. So that's good. Another option is academia. So I would basically become a research professor, kind of the ones who you're working for right now for the SHINE program. And I'd be like that and make a difference in the research world. Or I could go back to high school and teach science to high school kids like you all. Because, honestly, for me, I really loved science in high school. And some of my favorite courses were chemistry and physics, which motivated me to pursue engineering. So I was like, okay, this is a good way to kind of give back to society. But I delved a little bit more into these these career fields, and this is what I figured out. 2 out of the 3 requires a PhD. And that's because a lot of these require research expertise. And, of course, that makes sense because you're getting a degree for research. To become a high school teacher, you need to be in a specialized program to get a master's in education. And, that's a specialized thing. So it made more sense for me to pursue a PhD. That's just particularly because I had more options available at that point. So I was thinking, okay, let's just kind of go with this. But that's not the complete story. I wanted to think more philosophically. I wanted to think, okay, what do I really want to do? What do I have a passion for? And if so, why do I have a passion for that field? And there were 3 things that I could think about. Well, and I was thinking back to college. I was reflecting back on my years. And college is such a pivotal moment of life choices. And there's a meme that was shown right here. You have this triangle where you have to choose between good grades, social life, and enough sleep. But the catch is you can only choose 2. And as much of a quote unquote joke that this kind of is, there's some truth to this, is that in college, you can't do everything and do it well. You have to one thing has to be sacrificed in order for you to do well in another thing. And that's kind of the thing, is that college is probably the first time in your life where you're outside of home and you have to make choices independently. And your parents aren't there to nag you to say, hey, you have to do this and this. You get to choose what you want to do. And how you balance that is also up to you as well. So that's that. The second thing is that college students have a lot of academic potential. And that's because in high school, you're expected to take a wide array of classes, such as all these science courses, but also like English, art, music. They want to make sure that you're a well-rounded person, right? But when you enter in with a specific major, you're taking classes that are pertinent to that major. So this is the first time where you're starting to really hone into these science classes. And as a result, and this will dictate where you're going to end up career-wise. So, and because you all are the next generation scientists, there's a lot of potential in that. But last but not least, I have a huge passion for STEM. And if you don't know what STEM is, it's this right here. And for me, I loved learning about science, but I also have a passion to teach people about science. And I tutored a lot of people like with classes, and I want to do that like as a career. So back then, that's what I wanted to do. And even now, that's what I want to do. So the best way to summarize is that I envision myself, my 28-year-old self right now, in the next 5 years as an associate professor and life mentor teaching biochemistry or something related to wonderful college students at a primary undergraduate institution. The last part means that I want to go to a college that's focused mainly on teaching, and I'll explain a little bit more about why I want to go into teaching more than research, but I'll keep it at that for the time being. So cool. I apply to PhD programs. Thank you, USC, for accepting me into the program. Yeah, so I started USC in August of 2014. So what's important to note is that I came in as a biomedical engineering specialization here. But Nathan, weren't you a chemical engineering major at UCLA? Well, that was true. And the reason for this transition was because after doing research that was in the biology field, it made me realize that I want to do biology-based research. I just find it more interesting, and I can see kind of I can see the big picture impact to society. And it took 6 years, but I graduated USC. I actually graduated this year, class of 2020. And yeah, I was able to get a PhD. I also got a master's along the way, but that's something that a lot of people get along the way because the requirements are the same. But yeah, thank you, USC, for the 2 degrees. All right, so first year PhD, walk into campus of USC, I'm thinking, all right, what research area do I want to do? I don't know what I want to do. I thought I did, but I really don't know. A lot of this stuff is like unknown to me. Well, I dabbled into the field of systems biology. And for those of you who don't know what that is, don't worry, I don't really know what that is either. It's really complicated. But the one thing I can tell you is that biological processes are very complicated. And especially for things like diseases, it would be nice if we can model it on a computer. For example, we put in all of the different parameters, and then we're able to simulate the actual processes so that we can detect what the major players of diseases are much faster. And specifically, I was working on computational analysis for metabolism in cancer cells. And that was really cool. To be honest, I thought I was gonna stick with it. But the issue is that a lot of it is coding. Pretty much all of it is coding. And I wasn't particularly good at coding. But not only that, I honestly didn't find it to be too interesting. And let alone do I want to do that for the next 5+ years of my PhD. So I jumped ships, and then I joined the field and committed to the field of tissue engineering. And I joined Dr. Megan McCain's lab. That's her right there, and that's me right there. And and for those of you who don't know what tissue engineering is, it's the easiest way to explain it is an equation. Cells in the body plus the material that the cells can grow on that are supposed to best mimic its native environment, plus biological factors and other external stimuli equals tissue engineering. So in the McCain lab, I did 2 major projects. And the first one was trying to best mimic a heart attack environment outside of the body. So just a brief background, all of you are familiar with the heart attack, but the way that it works is that there's a blockage in the artery, and then that causes death of heart muscle cells. But what's not as commonly known to laymen is that the entire heart isn't damaged. It's only a specific region. And the rest of the heart actually remains healthy. And if we look at the physiological characteristics of the healthy versus the damaged heart, is that in the healthy heart, you see in this dark pink that the cells are highly aligned. And that's incredibly important because in a heart, there has to be force that's generated uniaxially, and that force needs to be strong enough to pump blood, for the heart to pump blood throughout the rest of the body. And not only that, the healthy heart is about 10 kilopascals. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. It just means that the healthy heart is very soft. However, on the other hand, if we look at the damaged region, we see that the once aligned heart cells are not aligned anymore. They're randomly oriented. And we see that this number has increased to over 50 kilopascals. That means that the heart attack, the damaged area is a lot stiffer than that of the healthy heart. In addition to that, because there was inflammation that occurred, there are a lot of chemical factors that were recruited in the process. So essentially the goal was identifying the relative effects of increased stiffness, loss of alignment, and also the addition of chemical factors after a heart attack. And we're doing this all outside of the body. This is what we call an in vitro experiment. And the major benefit is that we are able to isolate specific parameters much easier outside of the body than having to use like an animal model. All right, the second project that you're looking at is a lot more complicated, but I personally think it's cooler because it's more complicated. Now, please try to follow along. I'm gonna do my best to explain it in the simplest way possible. This project was in collaboration with the Morset Lab in the stem cell department. And what the Morset Lab does is they focus in the area of research called synthetic biology. And to simply put, synthetic biology is genetically altering cells so that the cells would be able to respond to a specific stimuli. So what you're looking at here, what they did in the previous research was that they placed down a small area of cells that had a stimuli that's attached to it, like this little indicated by this arrow. They put it down on the platform, and then immediately afterward, they put a whole bunch of cells that are able to respond to that stimuli directly. Like they place those cells everywhere, but only in the region where there is a direct overlap were the cells able to transform into skeletal muscle cells, as shown here in green. So that's pretty cool, right? So you essentially genetically modify a cell so that when they're in response to a specific stimuli, the cells would be able to transform into another cell type. I think that's pretty interesting. So my project was that we expanded on this idea, and instead of putting an undefined region of cells, like of stimuli, we were actually able to geometrically print stimuli directly on a platform and then put cells everywhere. So if we look at the data that I've shown here, so GFP is our stimuli. If there's no stimuli, there is no cell transformation, as shown by MyoD and Cherry. However, when we print these quarter circles of the stimuli that's enclosed in this area right here, we are able to see these red dots that the cells are expressing only within the circle, but not outside of the circle. That shows that the cells were able to transform into these skeletal muscle cells. So, so overall, the goal was engineering skeletal muscle tissues in a spatially organized manner using genetically modified cells. So hopefully that made sense, but that was kind of the meat of it all. So fast forward 6 years, I successfully defended last December. That's me right there. That's Dr. McCain, and that's Dr. Morset. It's a line right here. But anyhow, yeah, so what a defense is basically, it's exactly as it sounds. I'm defending the reason why I deserve a PhD. And I'm showing that in a form of a PowerPoint with all of the data and research that I've done. A few weeks later, I submitted my dissertation, which is basically an extensive written version of my defense. Just to kind of put it in context, mine was about 120 pages. It was really long. It was a long journey, guys. And I'm thankful it's over. And earlier this year, I became the teaching lab manager. And yay. And I made it to this point. So what do I actually do? So my main job is to manage the teaching labs in the biomedical engineering department. But of course, you all know COVID-19 hit around mid-March. So because of that, the teaching labs were put on hiatus. So, and because of that, the department asked me to jump on a new project. And specifically, the project was working with the committee to design a website. So you see a screenshot right here and the link. That essentially helps connect healthcare facilities all throughout the greater Los Angeles area to get access. They have needs for specific equipment such as face masks, face shields, and disposable gowns. And that's what we call a personal protective equipment. So I'm going to be referring to that as PPE from now on. So the healthcare facilities and hospitals need PPE. But as you know, because COVID-19 hit so rampantly and nobody was prepared for this. So there was a huge shortage of supply that they can procure from from vendors. So as a result of that, we need to look for an alternative source, and that was 3D printing these pieces. So we actually had we connected these hospitals to volunteers who were able to 3D print parts for like face shields, for example. And then we had volunteers who were able to assemble the pieces together, and then other volunteers who were able to deliver them to the hospitals that were needed. And this was a lot of work, but it was very rewarding. And this was a good experience. I learned how to do website design. I think that's pretty sweet. I want to mention that this project was a collaboration between Keck School of Medicine at USC, the School of Architecture at USC, the Center for Advanced Manufacturing at USC, the Iovine and Young Academy at USC, as well as 3 non-USC organizations. Shout out to Sunweaver Creative, Crash Space, and Get Us PPE. So the reason why I'm showing you all this list of collaboration is to make a point that engineering projects in general are highly interdisciplinary. And all of you are doing Shine under Viterbi, right? So that means that if you join engineering, what I want you to know is that it's almost impossible for one major to do, like for your field to do everything on your own. You need to get help from all of these different groups, even non-engineering groups. And ultimately, that's how you build this crazy project. And that's how the research world works. Phew. All right. So I talked the past 11 slides were about me. You learned about my whole life, basically, starting from the end of high school all the way till now. And this is my condensed biography. So then you're thinking, oh man, Nathan, you're awesome. You graduated, now you're able to make a huge impact. Well, sure. I hope I can make a huge impact, and I'll continue to work hard to make a huge impact. But the truth is that I'm only one person. I'm limited in the amount of things that I can personally do. And even if I have all of these accolades, I can only contribute to society just because I have limitations. But if we include all of you, next generation aspiring scientists, then collectively, all of us are able to make even greater impact to society. And I think that's the beauty of it. Science, we're not isolated to just ourselves. It's always a group effort. And you'll see so when you're doing research this summer that you're getting help from different people. And I think that's super awesome. And you guys are all learning the appropriate tools to be able to do research in the near future. So what a great way to make impact. So we're going to delve into something that you guys are familiar with at this point. Dr. Mills asked you to read an article by Philip Lukeman, and the title is A Guide to Mentoring Undergraduates in the Lab. So this article I thought was fascinating because it was a good way on teaching how to mentor undergrads, but this also applies to high school students as well, or just trainees in general. And there were 2 quotes that I want to take out that I thought were impactful. The first was, you therefore need to spell out early and repeatedly in your interactions explicit cultural expectations. While training, developing technique mastery in the laboratory is a key confidence builder in the training. So these 2 hit 2 major points that I feel like are important in research. Is that first, you can't assume that newcomers will know the lab culture. And when you're working in the lab, it becomes like second nature to know that. But you can't, I don't think it's wise to assume that everybody has that knowledge, because that's not commonplace outside of the lab. So it's the professor and the mentor's job to explain the expectations. Secondly, there is a lot of training that needs to be done. And sometimes it can be frustrating because it takes so long, but you know what? You get better as you continue to do things. And that's actually a huge confidence builder in research. And I'll explain more of why you need that confidence, because research doesn't go as planned, usually. All right, the second thing that you looked into was the TED Talk by Uri Alon. And there were 2 quotes that I got out of this that I thought were awesome. He mentioned, we'd all studied science as if it's a series of logical steps between question and answer, but doing research is nothing like that. You all are familiar with studying science, right? You all do that right now, and that's how you got to this point. and we all can relate to doing science. And yes, usually A leads to B. But in research, A does not always lead to B. And that's where the second quote comes in. So you see, knowing about the cloud and about saying yes and made my lab very creative. So the cloud, as Dr. Alon talked about, is basically this area where where you assume when you think A is equal to B, but you start running into a brick wall. There are a lot of failed experiments. There's just a confusion. It just seems like A does not really lead to B anymore. And this whole like shroud of doubt is what he calls the cloud. But even though it's a difficult place to be in, that's where most of the creative results come out of. So with that said, one common takeaway from these two sources of information is that studying science and conducting research is quite different. So the expectations of lab culture, such as failed experiments, there's no such thing as failed experiments. It's always a lesson to learn. And thinking outside the box, A could equal C. That this expectation needs to be clearly communicated. Because honestly, for me, I didn't really know that. So whenever failed experiments come, I would always be so down. I would be discouraged. And this goes back to why we need the confidence. Because that's the drive that gets us through. All right, so what you're looking at in this slide is the most text-intensive slide, but I'm hoping it's the most informative and relevant for you. I did a compare and contrast between amongst high school lab, undergrad lab courses, and research labs. So one thing is common amongst all three is that you're learning some kind of scientific concept, whether it's basic scientific concepts or super specific, you're learning something. And that's always important because you should always be learning. This is where now the distinction lies from the lab classes versus the research lab. For high school and undergrad lab courses, your lab experiments are usually guided. You're given step-by-step procedures on what to do. And sometimes the teacher or professor will even tell you what you're supposed to expect. But that's not really so in the research field. A lot of it, you don't know the step-by-step procedure. You think you know where you're supposed to go, but that doesn't always end up being the case. So there's a lot of brainstorming that needs to go into this. And they expect you to be independent when you do this. Another distinction is that if you fail an experiment in your lab classes, that will affect your lab grade. Like you won't get 100% in the class if you fail something, right? And you all probably understand that as well. But if you carry that over to the research lab, failed experiments are normal. There's no such thing as a failed experiment. There is a steep learning curve in research, and you have to keep making mistakes in order for you to learn. Nobody gets it down on the first go. And as a result, you need to spend time solving this problem. So you're thinking, okay, is my procedure incorrect somewhere along there? Was I a little bit too careless in this one step? Because human error is a huge source of issue. And then ultimately, as you whittle it down, you'll get to a point where you will actually be able to get a successful experiment. And how rewarding that is. And the last two there's a distinction between all three, is that in high school, let's say, for example, let's take AP Chem. In AP Chem, you do experiments, like several experiments throughout the semester, right? And usually these experiments last about 1 to 2 hours, and you do some lab reports. In undergrad, the major difference is that you have classes specifically for lab. And so you're conducting experiments weekly or bi-weekly, and usually they last about 2 to 3 hours. And then you're writing lab reports for homework. In the research lab, you're conducting experiments daily. And not only that, you're also reading scientific articles because you need to learn from what people have done in the past so you're not reinventing the wheel. And once you're able to get data on your own that's meaningful, then you would give back to the scientific community by writing papers. The last thing is that in high school, the integrated labs, so usually lab classes are integrated with the course, right? So like AP Chem, for example, the labs last for 1 school year, the duration of the course. In undergrad, your courses are a lot shorter. So they're either a semester or a quarter, depending on what school you go to. So it only lasts for that period. However, in the research lab, the duration varies. It can range from anywhere as short as 4 years. I see somebody graduating in 4, which is pretty impressive, to all the way to upwards of 7 years. I graduated in 6 years. That means I'm closer to the later end. And that also depends on what type of research you do, whether you're doing computational based or you're doing quote unquote wet lab research. So I'm hoping that this table was informative. So I talked a lot, and sorry, I need some water, but I talked a lot, and I'm hoping you learned a lot about me, but more importantly, I'm hoping you learned a lot about research, and hoping that that's pumping you up for real research. And as I mentioned, I've seen Shine for the past 3 years, and there are 4 quick takeaways I want to share with you all. The first is that there's gonna be academic challenges. It's not, because research is not easy and it's not clear cut. You might run into brick walls, but a part of it, but that's part of the challenge, you know. And you grow as a scientist, you grow as a person when you encounter these challenges. Second, you're gonna get confused. Let's say later on you'll learn how to use MATLAB. Some people MATLAB's gonna come super easy. Some people MATLAB's gonna be super difficult. And not only that, you might not even understand some of the papers you're reading. They use too many difficult words. I had that. I can relate to that. And you know what? If science was easy, to be honest, then that wouldn't really make sense, because then we would all have PhDs. There would be a cure for cancer. COVID-19 wouldn't even exist at this point, because they would have found a vaccine for it. But that's not reality, right? Science is complicated, and it's okay to be confused. And along that same line, let's have patience. When you run into a brick wall, when you feel frustrated that you're not understanding things maybe as fast as your colleagues, or just in general, you're not understanding this when you feel like you should, let's take time to know that, hey, there's a learning curve, and people are running at different speeds. And to let you know that the one who constantly is jogging is going to win more than the one who sprints in the beginning and gets burnt out. So, be patient. And if anything, what I learned from my PhD is to be patient. Now I feel like I'm more of a patient person than I was prior to my grad school. Last but not least, have fun. And I think this is really important, because there's a lot of stress to get work done. You might just be pressured beyond your limit. But you know what? Research is also supposed to be fun. It's supposed to show you a side that you don't learn in a classroom setting. And I hope that you are able, even with the pressure, that you're able to also have fun as well. All right, this is the last slide, and and this doesn't really apply directly to you, but this has been an issue in general in the research field, and that's ethics and integrity. When experiments fail constantly, there is a huge temptation to cut corners. And some examples are fabricating data. For example, let's say you have a lot of data points that show some kind of trend, but you have some outliers that are really going to skew your data. So you're thinking, I'm just gonna delete these data points. Nobody has to know about this. And look, it's a perfect line, but that's not right. And also, let's say, for example, if you don't want to go to lab, you call up the professor. Like Dr. McCain, I can't go into lab today. I have a stomach ache. And then you hang up the phone, you start playing on your PS4. These are all, this isn't right? And you guys can see why that's the case. And for that reason, that's the reason why researchers have lab notebooks. And a lab notebook is basically a compilation of step-by-step procedures, notes, let's say from your colleagues on some suggestions, or just from what your readings, and you're pasting data. And it's a form of accountability, because honestly, when you cheat the system, you're doing injustice to yourself, to the professor, and also to the scientific community. Because if you send out falsified data and it's not reproducible, then the scientists cannot use that, and you wasted a lot of people's time, right? Ultimately. So in the research world, ethics and integrity are crucial for science to be meaningful. So this is just something I want you all to keep in mind. And with that said, thank you for your time, and I'd like to take questions. And I will stop sharing. Sorry, that was a little bit long, but you guys did it.
That was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cho. All right, let's see if we have some questions. You guys can unmute and ask questions.
Okay, I want to ask Dr. Cho, what do you think was the most
like at a certain point where you were most conflicted, and how did you get over it like throughout your entire academic career?
Sorry, did you say convicted, or you mean when it was the toughest?
Yeah, like a tough situation.
I see. So for me, to be fair, um, I actually hit rock bottom pretty much between my first year and my second year of PhD. I also hit another one like around like my fourth year for whatever, fourth or fifth year for whatever reason. And I think that's the first time in my life where I actually suffered from depression. And I'm not saying this to deter you guys away from research, but I think it's important to be transparent. And for me, research is hard. When all throughout up till college, the professor or someone's telling you what to do step by step. But in the first time you're trying to figure things out on your own. The amount of information is endless, and it just feels overwhelming. And when you continue to have failed experiments, and when somebody tells you, "Hey, why aren't you getting data?" That's really discouraging. So for me, I remember I was thinking like, I should stop. I should quit. This is too hard. And if you talk to a lot of PhD students, almost everyone goes through this. They just won't be as like sharing this as much. But but what kept me going was that I kept thinking about the end goal. I want to go into teaching, and for that I need a PhD. And if anything, I try to see things as in an optimistic light. Hey, it's difficult, but life is difficult in general, and I'm learning discipline. I'm learning to overcome obstacles step by step. I'm not going to gain anything by running away from it. So I want to improve on the areas that I'm weak, and I want to get to the finish line. And it took a while, but I'm a living testimony that you are able to get to the end. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
I had a question. In terms of like getting your PhD, is it just completely independent, or is there like support for that?
Oh, sure. I think the best way to put it is when I say independent, I mean that it's not that the professors are not helping you. Like you guys, like there are weekly or bi-weekly meetings. So for the professors to give you feedback. So it's not like you're kind of in the cloud like all the time. But what I mean by independent is that there has to be a lot of self-motivation, because there's no like agenda that the professor would set for you. They're not going to tell you, hey, do this experiment, this experiment. Like you have to know from the research, like they're reading the papers from before that, hey, this is what researchers did in the past to prove this point. So therefore I need to do that. Yes, the mentors are there to guide you, and they will guide you. And especially for you guys, they are gonna they're going to be a lot more understanding. But I think when you get to the PhD point, there is this lab cultural expectation that you do things on your own. But again, that's why Dr. Lukeman made that article, is because a lot of professors and mentors do not mention that explicitly. They assume that that's what they do, and that's the last thing you want to do, is to assume that the others know exactly what you're that you know it. So I hope that answers your question.
I was wondering how you found out, like why you wanted to switch to tissue biology from system biology. Like, was there a certain event or something that caused you to switch?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's because when I first joined the systems biology, that's just because at that moment that seemed like the most interesting research. So when just to give a little bit of context, when I first came in, Dr. McCain was not a professor yet, so her profile was not even on the website. So I didn't even know about this research. Like, if, for example, if I saw hers like already developed, then I think I might have actually jumped on there first. But I actually took Dr. McCain's class. So all professors have to teach class for grad student and for undergrad. And I took a grad class. So I thought a lot of the concepts that I learned in class were super interesting. And I don't know if some of you are probably under Dr. McCain for the shine, and she's super, super nice. So for me, I was like, I can see myself a lot. And if one person told me that, hey, research is important, but your relationship with your professor, like that community, is incredibly important. So for me, Dr. McCain was super, super awesome. So I was like, and just the stuff was awesome. And I just didn't see myself being in systems biology for so long. So I just thought, if I'm going to jump ships, I'm going to do it then. So that's kind of where I ended up. And I really liked it. So it was a good choice, kind of in hindsight.
Got it. Thank you.
I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on what it was like choosing between doing academic research and like private biotech work.
Biotech work? You mean like why I chose to do PhD versus going straight into like the
Or
company?
or more so like what you decided to pursue, because you said right that you're more interested in like teaching than like say
Oh.
for example like working at Johnson Johnson. Just like how how you've come to that.
Right. Actually, thanks for pointing that out. I think I might have actually uh I might have skipped over that. But yeah, the reason why I want to go into teaching is because after going through so many ups and downs for research, at one point I realized research isn't for me. Like, and it's okay for all of you as you're doing research to come to that conclusion, because that's what experience is about. You figure out that, hey, this isn't the path that I thought it was going to be. So for me, like when I was doing research undergrad, I thought it was cool. So that's why I continued. But when I figured out what real research is like, that's when I started to realize, oh, this isn't for me. So, and then at that point, like if I wanted to, I could work for a company. So I was thinking like company or to become like a professor. And I realized that there are some professors who are focused on teaching. And I remember going back to when I was trying to decide my career path and just knowing my passion for like teaching students. That's kind of, I think, what drove me more towards the teaching side. Company would have been good. Honestly, it would have been better financially to pursue that route. But the issue is that like I want to have flexibility in my schedule. Whereas if you work for a company, you're kind of set from like 8 to 4 or whatnot. So it's kind of nice because you usually don't work overtime. But the issue is that I don't want like a strict regimen. And also from there, because it's company, it's a business, they're gonna want like output all the time. And failure in a way is not gonna be an option. So I think a lot of that is also what's deterred me from going into industry.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, Katie, you're muted.
Okay. When you are a graduate student, you are paid. So it is different that way too, that the labor that you bring to the principal investigator is compensated. So you are also learning a lot of job skills, right? How to hold down a job and stuff like that. My question is, so both you and me are highly trained to do research. The research I'm trained to do is I spent many summers at UCLA looking at old television shows in the library, and so we have different research methods. But why do you think there is a value to having spent I spent 8 years learning how to research, learning how to write. I wrote a book, a peer-reviewed book and stuff like that. Why is it valuable to have that much experience to be a college teacher? Why not just be a high school teacher where you don't really need that much experience? What's the value of having deep immersion in research?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Katie. I think the major thing is that when you do research, even if it's a very specialized field, you have to study it. Like, you have to be up to date with what's going on, because science is such a dynamic field. There's always going to be new information that's being disseminated out. So what once used to be relevant is not relevant anymore because somebody else found a more efficient way of doing it. So for me, why you need that information to become a professor, I think part of it is because you want to be able to give like relevant information when you're teaching. Because I think for a lot of us, like sometimes concepts go over our head, but when we give it real life example of what's going on, I think it solidifies better. And I think as a professor, it's really important to have that in your arsenal, just because I think the students are able to comprehend the concepts better. And to be honest, I think one of the things I wish I also had too was industry experience, because then I could give industry examples while I'm teaching. And I think the best professors are the ones who have both. But I would say that, yeah, like 5 to 8 years of like doing PhD, it's tiring. And in a way, it actually doesn't train you to teach. That's kind of the irony behind all this, is that you know a lot, you know how to do research, you know how to read papers, but it doesn't mean you're good at communicating what you know to people. Like, at least like in a classroom setting. So that's something I wish there was a PhD for, but unfortunately PhD is all research based. So yeah, I would say that my time wasn't wasted. I wish I learned a couple more like teaching related techniques, but I think because of that, I actually had to I sought out additional resources, such as I was working with CET, the Center for Excellence in Teaching. So I attended a seminar for like future faculty, for example. So that was something that like I learned a lot about, and and because of that, I got to interact with non-science people. And I think what you realize that is that when you're doing science, you think of such like a A equals B kind of mindset, that like when somebody else is like, but what about like doing it this way? And then it's like, no, but I know that this works. Like, why do I have to switch? Why do I have to use a different methodology? But it just kind of, you become like, it forced me to become more open-minded. And I don't know, I would say that, yeah, in general, research is very specific. It makes you very, very, it makes you highly trained in that one field. But yeah, like I would say that, I mean, this is the unfortunate reality, is that that's why I think a lot of professors, they're a lot weaker in teaching, because their focus is on research, and not everyone has a gift of teaching, to be honest. But I think that's where you have to start seeking additional help in order to get to where you need to be. I hope that answers it. That was a long, windy answer.
And that's also why we spend so much time in Shine learning how to communicate what we're doing in our research, because communication skills will advance your career no matter what you choose. So, are there any last questions for Dr. Cho before we wrap things up?
I have a question. Could you elaborate on like why you decided to pursue your PhD at like USC, like what factors, and like, yeah.
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. I mean, so I think there's several factors that come into account when you're applying for, when you're trying to decide on what school to go in for graduate school. So graduate school, as I mentioned, it's like, it could last a really long time, 5 to like 7, 8 years, right? So first of it is I chose USC because of location. So I really like LA. So after going to UCLA, I realized I want to stay in LA, and USC was just a good option for that. Let's say, for example, you get into a school like in the middle of nowhere. Sure, they might give you more money. Oh yeah, by the way, the second option is how much stipend you're getting for doing research. Because obviously some places the cost of living is a lot lower. So if you get the same amount of stipend, then you're technically getting more value. But you also got to realize you're also in the middle of nowhere. So you're like it's like kind of like choosing a job, like and also like the amount of stipend, because depending on what schools you go to, they give you more or less. And I realized that public schools such as like UCs, they tend to give you less. But I think that's just because they're state schools and they're limited in funding. I think the last thing is the department that you're going to be working with. So, I mean, of course, the professor who you want to work for. So people work in, let's say, the field of tissue engineering. There's plenty of people, but only Dr. McCain does what she does exactly. And you also want to care about the professor too, and what they have to provide. So I think just seeing your compatibility, like when you're going to school for an interview, and just seeing like how well do you like the school, how well do you get along with the group. I think that kind of helps with the process. And also I was fortunate enough that USC had a rotation system the first year. So you're forced to do 3 different labs. So that kind of gave me a better idea of what I wanted to do and what I didn't. Whereas most PhD programs in other schools, you have to commit right away. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. So I was fortunate enough to have that buffer, but a lot of people don't. So I think that's why if you are serious about pursuing a PhD, it's better to know what you want to do earlier than later.
Thank you.
But you can change your mind. Okay, any last question? Anybody else? I'll take utter silence as no more questions. All right. Nathan, if you're willing to hang out a little bit, we can let the cohort go. And if anybody does want to ask a question in a less public setting, we can hang out to answer those. Let's thank Nathan, Dr. Cho, for sharing so intimately about his journey and the ups and downs. So you guys, I hope that you're meeting with your mentors this afternoon or have figured out the schedule for next week. We will not be meeting in the mornings like this. There will be MATLAB training on Monday at 1. Kendall will kick it off. We will have lab safety training Wednesday afternoon, and we will meet back together. I will be with you again Friday morning to learn a little bit more about searching the literature so that you can know your way through all of the research that's come before. So I will say with that, have a great lunch, have a great weekend. You know how to Slack me or email me or text me if you have any questions or problems or anything like that. And otherwise, I say goodbye. I'll hang out with Dr. Cho if there are any other questions. Have a good weekend.